Yeah, double check. We've got somebody's mic on. I think I may have found it. Hang on. Okay, I think we're good. Tonight, basically, you know, we are coming into the last part of the class. We finished class a week from this coming Saturday on August the 24th. So tonight I wanted to try to do two things. We're going to go through sort of the big picture overview of data and how you analyze it and putting this all together. So hopefully you'll see the kind of big picture for how we do this. And then secondly, to answer any questions that you guys might have that you feel like, you know, just haven't been answered throughout the course. So a reminder as well, since the course closes on August 24th, that is a Saturday. So all assignments have to be in by 11:30 p.m. Central Standard Time on Saturday. You know, normally we close out the week on Sundays and new stuff opens on Monday, but in this case, it's on Saturday night, so don't miss that. If for some reason you can't get everything to me by that time frame, you will need to text me and let me know that so that we'll make some arrangements with you on how we handle that. But if I don't hear from you, I do grades on Sunday and I post those grades, you know, it becomes an issue. So just communicate with me and let me know what's going on. So do you guys have any questions about the remaining assignments that you still have to turn in or anything like that before we get into tonight's discussion? Everybody's good? Ready just to finish out this course and move on, right? Okay then, without further ado, I'm going to turn on screen share. I don't know what in the world I was possibly thinking when I put this together this time, because it has 57 slides, which is really kind of overkill on my part. So we're not going to go through all 57. We're going to skip around a little bit here. So hang on. Let me see what's going on. Okay, so hopefully when you started the class, you didn't look like this and feel this way, that you were just drowning in data and information. Hopefully we've equipped you with some tools to do that. A lot of these slides come from what's called EDL707. That is actually an educational service center, Region 19 in Texas. For those of you that are not familiar with Texas, they have 22, 23 regional service centers. They have great free resources. So, you know, if you're ever looking for something, just type into a Google search, ESC Texas, and you'll get a list of them. Curriculum stuff, Region 4 is really known for that, whereas data stuff is ESC or Region 19. So anyway, this is some of their materials as well as some things I threw in as well. So hopefully you've had a paradigm shift. I've really enjoyed reading some of the last discussion forums for week 6 that you guys have been posting. You know, I think some of you have made a paradigm shift, which is exciting. You told me that I came into this class kind of dreading it, thinking, oh, I can't do data, I'm not a math person, and you're walking away feeling like you can at least stand your own now. So that's wonderful. Okay, so if you're thinking about all of this, what is it that is our responsibility? So just to frame our conversation, what is our responsibility as it relates to data? Whether you're a teacher, a department chair, an assistant principal, an instructional coach, you know, what is it that we all have as a responsibility thinking about data? Now, our states tell us something about that data piece, and if you don't know what your state says about it, then, you know, you might want to do some research. So with those state expectations, how does that align with your professional responsibility? And again, what do you know? How do you know if you're doing what you should be doing? So again, just some questions to think about. You know, so how do we quantify efforts and responsibilities in education and use data? When we get an accountability rating, do we really understand how they arrived at it? You know, a lot of people don't realize that they do what's called pre-assessment scoring and post-assessment scoring. So what I mean by that is that they may publish a document, a blueprint that says in order to reach level 3 on the LEAP test, you have to score at this level. So I'm just going to make up a number. Let's say there's 50 questions. You have to get 40 out of the 50 questions correct. Well, they administer the test, and particularly if it's an election year, and gosh, 10% of the students in the entire state actually met that standard. So then they do what's called post-assessment scoring. So they might decide that, you know what, we said originally that you had to get 40 questions right, but if we drop that number to 36 instead of 40, you know, we end up with 60% of the students in the state reaching that level. They're not, I mean, it's not really, I wouldn't say it's unethical, but a lot of people don't realize that's done. And it's always interesting if you kind of track and look when the governor needs something to look really good in education, usually around the re-election time, you will see some of those things happening. So it's important to understand really what it is that's being measured. And of course, we've talked about data storytelling. So, you know, what is that story that's being told? You know, can we change the story? Can we really expound upon it? Can we make it better? Okay. So, again, just something to think about. You know, so as a teacher, the state of Louisiana expects me to understand and disaggregate data, and I'll meet that expectation as given by engaging in professional development or whatever it is, or you could even put a date there. So just a little cartoon y'all can look at. Now, we've talked also a lot about lots of different templates. And one of the things that I got in terms of feedback was that, you know, people wish they could use their own templates. I thought I had told you guys at some point, you know, you can always use your own template. Just, you know, let me see it and make sure that, you know, we were on the same page. But, you know, of course. So I'm not throwing another new one at you necessarily. But this is just an example of one of the things that you can do when you're starting to think about using data, and particularly if you're going to follow the data-wise process. So the whole idea is you start with the end in mind and you put in your goals. How are we going to progress measure that? What does progress look like? What's our evidence that we're going to use? And then what are the next steps? So you've done this kind of work using various templates and activities. But again, here's just another idea of a template that may be very helpful, particularly this time of year as you're starting off a brand new school year. We've also used some of the resources from Driven by Data. And so, you know, with that, hopefully you've got some common vocabularies that you're using. You know, I think some of you know I'm actually reviewing some grants right now for the U.S. Department of Education, and there are so many acronyms in those, sometimes it's mind-boggling. But if you don't know some of these, LEA is your local education agency. That's used a lot at the U.S. Department level. TEA is the Texas Education Agency. PSP is a personal service project plan. You know, etc. So we must make sure that we really do understand the vocabulary that people are using, but most importantly, that whatever we're doing, it's grounded in good, solid research. So, you know, if you go off and do something completely different, you know, and people question it, you want to make sure you can find those resources and research that proves this is really good information and sharing. Okay? So, 3 of the questions in the book, Driven by Data, which is by Paul Bamberg Santoyo, is, you know, it's kind of like that the 4 questions DeFore has in the PLC model. These are the 3 that Paul has in the Driven by Data. So what processes or practices do you have in place to reach your goal? How is data used to drive your decision making? And is your school set up for sustainability? So if your school really hasn't been doing a lot with data, or maybe it's time to refocus, these are great questions to sit and work through as a faculty or as a department or as a team to kind of get your mindset around the idea of data. So if you're not familiar with Paul Santoya, or excuse me, I say it backwards, Paul Bambrick Santoya, this is his book, Driven by Data. You can get it on Amazon pretty cheap. I've actually gone to several training sessions with Paul, and there's some really good stuff in here, but I'll tell you the thing I liked most was for every single template he has in his book, there's a CD that goes with it. So all you have to do is print the copies, and you don't have to go out and create something. So if you're really starting early in the process and you're looking for some real tools, Driven by Data or DataWise are two exceptionally good resources. So there's 4 basic elements, that you have to have when you're doing data, and we've talked about this. There has to be assessment, there has to be analysis, there has to be action, and hopefully we're making all of our decisions based on data. So there's that culture that also supports it. So, just another version, I guess, here. So, where does it all start? We have to think about starting with assessment. So what is it that the assessment's measuring, and what is it telling us? So you may want to think about, what are some of your current practices? Sorry, I think I went too far. I'm going to go back here. So we have to also think about that if we're using assessment as our starting point, and that assessment's going to give us some data, we have to make sure that we understand from the assessment what's the level of rigor, how often is this going to be assessed, or how frequently does this occur, and is it aligned to our curriculum? Because if any one of those elements is missing, then that assessment data that we're getting is not going to be accurate or helpful. It's what they would call false data. So to give you an example, we had a high school principal in Dallas when I was an assistant superintendent. She was excellent, probably one of our strongest principals. And her school was doing really well, except they kept struggling with math. Their math state assessment results, their graduation metric, just wasn't moving. It was kind of static, and she wasn't getting the results that obviously she wanted or we expected for the school. So she went to the director of mathematics for the district. And, she basically said that, look, I need help. I don't know what to do. We know what the assessment is. The instruction's really strong. We've got a lot of indicators that, what the teachers are doing in the classroom is effective, but we're worried about the curriculum part. So the mathematics director listened to that story, and she was very clear and, oh, this is great. We have done tons of research. The curriculum's aligned. If you will just do these things, everything's going to be great. So the principal did. Well, guess what? The results came back, and the school scores had actually dropped significantly. Well, in a high-stakes accountability system like we were in Dallas, oftentimes that kind of thing happening can cause the principal to lose their jobs. And so when she was called in to, be talked to about her results, I don't think an employment decision had been made, she was really honest with her supervisor about what had happened. Well, so the supervisor took that and got some people together, and they looked really long and hard at the math curriculum. And what they found was, they did a curriculum audit, quite frankly, was that the mathematics curriculum was not aligned with the state assessment at all. And so no matter how great a job the teachers did analyzing the data from the benchmarks and formative assessments that the math department was providing, and no matter how great the instruction was, they could, they did as well as could be expected when you were teaching the wrong stuff. It ended up costing the director of mathematics her job. But that's why it is so very important that we understand and we really look long and hard, and you start with the end in mind, which is the assessment. Then you make sure the curriculum is actually teaching what is being assessed. Not only teaching it, but that it's at the rigor level that it needs to be. You're covering the material and teaching it frequently, and that it is, of course, aligned to not only assessment, but to the instruction. So, the purpose of assessment is to increase quality. The purpose of evaluation is to judge quality. So it's kind of like what we talked about last time, the difference between assessment and grading, or assessing and grading. So I talk all the time about the triad. Here you go. Here it is in a little graphic. So, you know, instead of my stupid little finger symbols that I showed y'all, this is what it looks like. So again, it's that whole idea of these build upon each other, okay? So when we think about how we use data, what should it be used for? Well, if we start with that assessment, we know that good data is going to improve teaching. It's going to give us a clear focus on what we need to be doing. It's going to be very visible. You know, when we keep data away from the users, which is actually our students, we're really doing a disservice. So it provides context for us. It also helps us with our accountability, and it also should be used frequently as what they call a pulse check, or what I call that daily formative assessment piece that is so critical. So we've talked a lot about how do you break apart or unpack a standard. So this is a student expectation for algebra that says write linear equations in two variables given a table of values, a graph, and a verbal description. So if we were to unpack this, what's our verb? Somebody shout it out.
Right.
Yeah, right. Okay. So what is your adjective?
Linear.
Yep, linear. And then the object?
Equations.
There you go. Excellent. Thank you. So unpacking the standard, remember that they're going to be writing. Who's going to be writing that? The students. What are they writing? Linear equations. What are they going to be writing it from? They're going to have to use a table of values, a graph, and a verbal description. So simply assigning the students 30 pages or 30 problems on a worksheet does not meet this standard. So assessment, understand the questions and how they're asked, align to the standards, leads to the kind of data we can actually act upon and improve instruction. Sorry, I don't know why this is not moving all of a sudden. This is the actual way that that particular standard is tested. Now, this is off the algebra end of course exam in Texas. But again, remember, this is how they're actually testing this particular standard. So, which situation can be represented by y equals 12x minus 4? So the students don't have to solve the problem. That's not what we're asking them to do. Instead, they've got to take that formula and see which one of these 4 answer choices would I actually use that answers, that this equation goes with, okay? So I'm not going to ask y'all to solve that, but just so you see. So, again, if we think about that triad of how everything's aligned, a lot of people start first with curriculum, then they create an assessment, then they do the instruction. That doesn't work because the assessment is really the starting point for all of this, okay? We talked a lot about common and interim or formative assessment, how it has to be aligned, and how we have to constantly reassess to make sure that we're teaching towards the goals we expect our students to do. I'm going to skip a lot of these. Okay. We've seen that one before. So in terms of data analysis, so we have assessments and we get data from them. So what do we do with it once we get it? So how do we have a structured process in place? So first of all, you know, I think that the simplest thing to do is make that data easy to comprehend. So a single page is much better than reams and reams and reams of paper. I think I may have told you guys a couple meetings back that my school, we created a one-pager that we gave to everybody and their brother, visitors, guests, parents, community members, advisory board members, teachers. It said everything that we thought was important about us from our data, and we made it simple. So we have to think about how that is. Let's look at a sample report. How many of you guys have ever gotten a report that looks something like this? Yeah, I see Rose raise her hand, some of you. Yeah, unfortunately, this is how our data used to come. Pretty overwhelming. So just to decipher this a little bit for you, so you will notice at the top there are numbers. and it says all responses, algebra semester test. So this is a final exam, I guess. And then you will see under each one of the numbers, you can see what the objective was. And then when you go down, you can see by class. So like, let's say that they were teaching standard A10 in column number 1. So you can see that there were 4 answer choices, A, B, C, and D. In this particular class, there were 81 students. 0% of them answered A. 2.47% chose B. 96.3% of the students chose C, and D, 1.23%. The correct answer was C. So what does that tell us? The vast majority of the students mastered these particular objectives that are across the top. Now, if you go on, and let me see if I can find one just here quickly for you. So if you look over in column 6, you will see the standards being taught were A12 and A1. That just means it was Algebra Standard 12. And if you go down and you look at the correct responses, you're hitting about 70% in every class. So what does that tell me? 30% of my students don't know the correct answer. So I need to delve in and see why they don't know the correct answer, because I got 30% of my students that are not doing well on this particular objective. It could be the way the question was written. It could be that we had some really great distractor other answers that were tripping the students up. Or maybe we hadn't taught this particular standard to the depth and complexity we needed to. So while this can look really overwhelming, once you kind of get a sense of what they're looking at, it's pretty simple to go in and pick out the critical places. Does that make sense? I'm really concerned. Look over in column 8. They're teaching standard A9 and A1, and look at this. The correct answer was J. I was going to say, how did they get 100%? They had one student. So I'd find out who that one student is and move into another class. But anyway, you'll notice they're hitting only 50%. So, that tells me that we've really got to look at that. So when I'm getting ready, if this is an end of semester test, this is current data, and I'm getting ready to start second semester teaching, I've got to go back and I've really got to look at and reteach under column 8, the standard A9, standard A1. Looking over in column 11, I'm really concerned about standard A2 and A1. I've got to figure out what the root cause of these poor results is. Is it the way the question was worded? Is it the distractor answers that are in there that are messing up students? Is it that I didn't teach it to the depth and complexity I needed to? Maybe I didn't spend enough time on it. There can be a lot of different reasons, but see how a response chart like this can be helpful? Looks scary, but it doesn't have to be.
I had a question.
Yes.
My question is an observation. It would probably be more effective if these testing companies start releasing the test after the kids take it. That way you can look at the distractors, because the distractors tell me more than the actual answer. Because if I look at the distractors, I can and try to figure out, okay, they chose this one because they made this mistake. Then you know how to address it whenever you teach the class.
Yeah, absolutely. That DeMarcus, that is an excellent observation. In Texas, for example, when they give like the state level tests, they do provide release tests, old tests that you can get some information from. There's a big push right now. I've often said that this is the most tested generation of students that we've graduated in the last 10 years. They were tested to death. And so there's a lot of pushback now from parents and things about all this testing. So there is beginning to be some discussions about using assessment to predict and to, so it's that idea, you give a pre-test, see how they do, teach a little bit, then you test them again to see how they do, to move more towards that kind of assessment and opening up and not making this also secretive. They've done blueprints, which are not, I don't think are particularly helpful. They're a little bit helpful because they tell you, there's going to be 5 questions on standard A1. But it's not until, like you said, the best way to do this is if you can see the actual test And you can look at how a standard is being assessed through the question. Then look at those answer choices. Because a lot of times, particularly like in mathematics, the incorrect answer can be something as simple as an arithmetic mistake that is commonly made by students. Tests are designed that way. So what you have to begin to understand is not only, all of this stuff that we're talking about, you've also got to understand test construction. I would do, a lot of study around it. And I would keep the pressure on the state departments of ed, particularly with our state assessments, to release them. Otherwise, we're kind of lost. I know we used to spend a lot of time, Texas used to, for every student who didn't pass their graduation test, which was in the 11th grade, they would provide them with study guides, individualized study guides, which was really pretty cool. But we would use those, like before we hand them to the kids, we're like, no, we need them. Because they had tons of practice questions in there that were absolutely written the exact same way with the same kinds of distractors as the actual test. And it was incredibly helpful to us. Great point. Hopefully we'll get there. Yeah. But thank you. That's an excellent point. Okay. So we've talked about why we look at data. I don't have to go through that with you. Test in hand analysis is exactly what we were just talking about. When you have that actual test in hand and you can get the data and you put the two of those side by side, it becomes really clear really fast. It's a lot harder to do if you don't have that assessment to work from. Okay? So that is what they call deep analysis. So you look for people use different terms. I don't like these particular terms that Region 19 is pushing around. But the idea is you've got to dig deep into the data quickly. Okay? That's why I said historical data is not helpful to you. What's much more helpful is, that semester exam, maybe from the district that's aligned well. Pull that test, look at the answers, look at your data, and then you can begin to do what you need to do. And again, these are some of the questions. How the class do as a whole, we just talked through that. What are their strengths and weaknesses? Clearly the stuff in column 1 they got, but the stuff over in column 8, boy, we really got to work on. And then again, going back to what we were just talking about, distractors. Did students all choose the same wrong answer? Well, then you got to look really hard and deep at that. Did they do similarly well on each question within the standard? So like on a particular assessment, they may say for standard A1, there's going to be 10 questions. You would want to not only look at the overall passing rate on that standard, but you want to look and see, it's like, okay, they have 10 questions on standard A1, and the students all consistently did well on these 8 of the 10. But they all consistently did poorly on these 2 questions. So again, that's when you do look at those answer choices and some other kinds of things, okay? People also want to know, how often do you do data talks, who leads them? If you don't know what a data talk is, it's kind of like a data storytelling, but it's also really part of what I call an effective professional learning community process when you're talking about the data and who you bring in and all of that. In Tracy's ideal world, data talks are done all the time because I like that kind of stuff, but it's done with your teachers, it's done with your parents, it's even done with your students. So data talks, it's not a written in stone sort of way to do these, but if you think about the structure and how and when, just answer these questions for yourselves. So it might be that, it's the first week of school, and the students all got their LEAP scores back. So, you may want to do a data talk with your students, do it in small groups, and, who's going to lead them? Well, you might lead them as the teacher. What's the structure going to be? Who's going to participate? And then what do you hope to get out of that? I know we did data talks all the time with our students because we expected our students to profile their own data and their growth. And, surprisingly exciting to them. We had some great teachers who made it fun. Okay. So I'm not going to go through all this. Like I said, this is all in the book, Driven by Data. But just to give you some other things. A lot of people too use these terms, what are some glows? So when you're talking about data, what are those things you're proud of? Where can we grow? And then, most importantly, to constantly be asking yourself, how effective is our data analysis? And what can we do to continue to progress forward? Okay. So let's talk about specifically action. So after that, after you've done the analysis and all those pieces, if you don't act upon the data, then it's really, truly worthless to you. So how do you do that? Well, once you analyze it, we identified in that data chart, remember column 8, what were some standards we needed to reteach. Now, if I just looked at that chart and went, oh, okay, and I didn't do anything with it, more than half the students didn't master a standard. Do you think they're going to master it unless I do some intentional reteaching? No, of course not. So you have to go in and figure out, these are the things we've got to circle back and hit. We've got to figure out why the students didn't learn it. Maybe it is a distractor in the assessment. Maybe it was that we didn't break the standard apart deeply enough, and so they did not get the content at the rigor level they needed it. So I've got to reteach it because clearly that question was asked at the synthesis and application level of Bloom's, but all I did was teach the students how to solve the equation. I didn't teach them how to apply it in the real world, so I've got to go back and do that. And then what techniques will I use? So what does that look like? Am I going to use small group instruction? Are we going to do some hands-on learning? Et cetera. But that's how once you get the data, this is how you start to begin to tie it to instruction. Okay? So what do you do, if a student meets grade level? Okay? Well, that's ideal, right? We want them at grade level. So what do? You have to make sure you move them to the next level. You also want to maintain it. Okay, so it's not like we ignore the kids who did what they needed to do. So the whole idea behind this is let's assume that on the LEAP test, there's 5 levels. So you've got lots of students who are at levels 1 and 2. So those are students who did not meet mastery, let's say. So what am I going to do for those students? Well, I've got to dig a little bit deeper. I've got to look at my students who did really, really badly. I also have to separate that out from the kids who I've always called bubble kids, and the same term is used here. Those kids that are like 2 questions away from the passing standard? Those are your bubble kids. I'm going to treat them slightly differently than my kids who just bombed it. So they get one kind of instruction. My bubble kids and my kids who are really far behind. My students on grade level, I'm doing 2 things. I need to maintain grade level, but I also try to push them to the next level so that they become your college ready type kids or your mastery plus kids. So they get a different kind of instruction. Then you've got those students who did great. They're all at level 4 and 5. So they're at and above mastery, they're college ready, etc. I also have to make sure I'm supporting them so that they don't drop back, but I also want to continue to push them. So if they were at 2 years above their grade level on this test, and I want them, next year they should be 3 years above or 4 years above. So you'll notice this is how you divide your kids based on data for differentiated instruction. So in my head, what I immediately think of, okay, I've got students now, I've regrouped them according to their data, and this group over here is getting one kind of instruction while this group over here is getting another. This is how you can differentiate in ways that make sense. Okay, so what does that look like? This is an example of how you do that for a 6-week instructional plan. Okay? And then very simple. So what are the standards I need to review and reteach? But I can't remember. I got new stuff I got to do too. So I can't let that go. So you're constantly doing this cycle. So this is across 6 weeks. Then what do I do as far as the standards review? So in this particular lesson model, they do a do now, which is some people call a bell ringer or introductory activity or whatever. What do I do in my mini lesson? What do I do in the heart of my lesson? How do I check for understanding? What's my assessment and what's my homework? So in your do now is when you oftentimes bring in those standards to review and reteach. Quick, short, first 5-10 minutes of classroom. Then in my mini lesson, that may be the new standard that I'm doing today. In the heart of my lesson, what might I be doing? Usually it's going to be a new standard where I've also cycled in some of those other standards that need to be reviewed and retaught. Check for understanding. Again, that formative assessment piece that you can do, it can be simple, exit card, whatever. We've talked about that. It can be something, it can be a quiz. It can be a reflective journal essay. There's a million different ways. Then you may not do a daily assessment if you're doing a daily check for understanding. You may. Some people would say a check for understanding is when I do those every 15-minute little formative assessment instructional pieces. Some people would say, well, and then I'm going to do something a little bit bigger like an exit ticket or whatever is my assessment. But then you also want to make sure you're giving the students homework that is aligned to all of this. Okay? So see how you can take data and feed it into an instructional plan, then into an actual action plan, which can then be put into whatever lesson plan format you're using. But this is pretty simple. Great, great, great way work for your data team, your PLC, your department, your content, whoever to do. This is ideally done collaboratively, so nobody's out there by themselves. If you're in one of those small schools, though, you're the only teacher who teaches basket weaving, you might have to do this by yourself, or you may want to partner with the other basket weaving teacher at a different school kind of idea. Okay, so planning, implementation, and ongoing assessment are also very helpful with this, because remember, going back to the triad, the curriculum, instruction, and assessment, we may have done a great job analyzing our data and looking at the assessment and getting all of this into place. We may have done a great job. Our curriculum is perfectly aligned. But unless we know that it's happening in the classroom instructionally, again, we've got a problem. So observation is a great way to look for evidence that what you want your teachers to be teaching is actually happening in the classroom. And I'm not talking about the kind where they come in and sit for 45 minutes to do your evaluation once a year. That's not helpful. I can walk in a classroom and in less than 3 minutes I can tell you whether or not they're on track, because I've done tens of thousands of these over the course of my lifetime, but I also know exactly what I'm walking in to look for, because I understand as a leader, I've looked at the data with the teachers. We've done the planning. I know what we're supposed to be doing in the classroom because of that planning piece. And then I can give the teacher feedback on how well that they are actually implementing this. Again, it's coaching, it's mentoring. It is not, I'm here to evaluate you. It's like you missed something as simple as you missed a great opportunity right there for a quick formative assessment. Or the fact that you did that formative assessment piece, that check for understanding, every 10 minutes was amazing. That kind of information. And again, because this is part of gathering data, we keep track of those observations and what we saw that worked, what we saw that didn't work, and then what we did to make it better the next time. Okay? So this is a student reflection template that, again, it's really just very much like a observation protocol. This is what you can use this actually with students, you can use it with teachers, etc. But it's really helping people to think about learning. So if you've studied anything from Hanel about metacognition, this is a way you actually teach habits of mind and metacognition. Okay? And again, you can just look at that, and I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Next, it talks about the data-driven culture. So again, it's that whole idea of what does a true data-driven culture look like, and you can see those component pieces. But notice, ongoing PD, leadership involvement, calendars, all those critical elements of really effective planning come into play, but you're talking specifically about data. Don't be afraid to borrow or steal from others, within copyright anyway. So I know a lot of times we had something in Dallas we called principal partners, and so we were put into groups of 3 to 4 principals who were at similar schools in terms of the high school principals went with high school principals, that kind of stuff, and we would go observe data meetings, PLCs. all of these kind of things, and share strategies and talk back and forth to each other. And it was really amazing to build that external sort of support team as well as the teams that you had in the school. And so we partnered for professional development. We did all kinds of things together. And like I said, it really did create not only a data-driven culture in the schools, but also throughout our community. Okay, I'm not going to talk a lot about PD, but we know that. This is just kind of a little self-assessment you may want to use too with your team members, and just basically everybody kind of tell you where they are. And again, so we get a good baseline data on everyone's understanding of how to do this kind of work. Okay. These are some of the mistakes that we can make when we're doing this. So, the whole idea of secretive interim assessments, we don't like that, because again, we need to see those actual questions. And then not making time. There's a lot of things that we can make as mistakes and things hopefully we can avoid. So these are the pitfalls of not doing it right. Okay? So, goals, are important, so you can look through that at your leisure. If you don't understand this, GL means grade level. Remember when we broke our students down into various grade level or categories? So approaches grade level, that may be your level 1 and 2 students. Meets grade level, maybe your level 3. Master's grade level, maybe your 4s and 5s. So you just have to look at this and understand that if we want to be an A, get the letter A, the grade A from the state, what do we got to do with where our students are? So, right now I've got 90% are approaching grade level and only 30% are in mastery. So what do I have to do? I've got to move a bunch of my students towards that grade level thing. So I'm going to spend a lot of time working with my students who are below grade level, is basically what that says. Okay. So you can also, I'm not going to get into this very much because it's a little bit complicated, but basically it's the idea of how many points does each student contribute towards meeting the standard, okay? So for example, if I am, I'm trying to think the best example to use. I am a white female. I'm not special ed, I'm not GT, I'm not at risk. That's all I bring to the table in terms of demographics, a white female. My granddaughter is a Hispanic female who is, so she's Hispanic, she's a female, she's gifted and talented. So I count in the accountability system in 2 categories, female and white. She counts in the accountability system 3 times, Hispanic, female, gifted and talented. My cousin, I'm making all this up, by the way. My cousin is black, male, at risk, and special ed. So he counts 4 times in the accountability system. You see where I'm going with this? So you can figure out how many times a student counts in your accountability system, and that's going to give you a better sense of how the overall score is going to go. The other thing that you will notice too when you do this is if you have a small subgroup of students, but they still are enough to be counted in the accountability system. So for example, maybe our group of Asian students. In Texas, to count as a group, you had to have 50. We have 50, let's say we had 52. My Hispanic students, I had, 1,000 plus. Well, you know what? For every one of those Asian students who failed one of the tests, they had a much bigger impact because they were a smaller number than my 1,000 plus Hispanic students. Does that make sense? This is a great way to kind of figure out how many times people count and then their statistical weight within the system. We figured out, pretty quickly that, for when you only have 52 students versus 1,000, I had to make sure that, all 52 passed because they had such a profound impact within the system. Does that make sense? Okay, so we're not going to talk about some of that. So what questions, comments, thoughts, ideas do y'all have? Okay, Mandy, your school uses these terms. Yeah, they're probably using driven by data. And don't get me wrong, it's a great book. Paul Bambrick is phenomenal. I mean, the man really is really good at this stuff. It's just a matter of which system you prefer. The difference between this and DataWise, I do think that Paul Bambrick gets much more into the nitty-gritty details, whereas DataWise kind of, it's written by Harvard, so they're kind of still in that theoretical mode, if that makes sense. When you go sit with Paul Bambrick and learn this stuff, you literally use the tools. He walks you through, here's what you do in this instance, etc. Okay. Oh, Rose, tell us what you wrote about this.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
So I said that our school uses state check-ins, which are 3 times a year, and they are created by the state to kind of help a person or a school assess where they are, as opposed to like meeting their standards. And so when we get them back, they come just like that algebra report where I can literally see how many of my kids scored and what letter they chose. And it's really helpful. We used it for the first time last year, and we're going to use it again this year. And I'm really kind of excited about it because I do get a lot of good knowledge from it.
Yeah, thank you, Rose. Yeah, that is very progressive and awesome. In Dallas, we created our own benchmarks, and we thought that was such a cool idea that so ridiculous. It's said very tongue-in-cheek. That after the assessments were given, teachers could go to this great big auditorium and they'd flash the question on the screen and they'd be like, and here's the data analysis. And you couldn't take your cell phone or a notebook or whatever. You know, I guess they were afraid the teachers were going to steal the questions. I'm like, this is the most stupid, ridiculous thing. What are y'all thinking to do that? But you know, when you get in there and get messy with assessment, you learn so much. So thank you, Reza. You're lucky that they're smart enough to understand how this is all supposed to work. Any other comments or questions, guys?
I talked with my principal yesterday, going through the evaluation for the mid-module or the mid-assessment, and she was explaining how being a K2 school, how it's almost harder to do the data because we don't do the standardized LEAP assessment. So they have to get more creative, come up with different standards to look at and assessments.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, it is hard when you're in a pre-K or K2 school, pre-K3, you know, that kind of stuff. Quite frankly, I know in Dallas, we had a lot of pre-K3 schools, and they were tested at grade 3. But we were really struggling with how do we know if they're on track until they hit 3rd grade. And then by the time we got the results back, they were gone on to their next school. But, you know, we decided at that point, we created our own tests. And, you know, it was very controversial. We gave, quote, a final exam to all of our students. Now, we didn't make it a grade or anything like that, but people thought we were insane to be testing such little ones. But it was the only data we could possibly come up with to kind of predict and help them as they move forward. So yeah, it is a challenge, definitely. The other part of this too that Paul Bambrick talks a little bit about in his book, but is the difference between absolute assessment or absolute standard assessment and growth assessment. You know, far too often we're looking only at a standard, okay? It's like, you know, you came in 5th grade, but you're reading at the 3rd grade level. And we worked and worked and worked, and, you know, by the time the assessment comes back, you did not meet the standard for 5th grade. You know what? You're now reading on a 4.7 grade level. So you, in essence, made 1.7 years of growth, but you still didn't meet the standard. Conversely, we may have a student who comes into 5th grade and they're reading on the 8th grade level. And by the time they take the test and it comes back, and now they're reading on the 7th grade level. So they had a year decline. That is so much more helpful in terms of understanding where the kid is and what the impact of teaching was, as opposed to just hitting that absolute standard. So states are starting to understand that. It's harder to measure. But, you know, quite frankly, if you're a teacher who's moving kids 2 and 3 years of you know, in their reading levels or their mathematics levels or grade levels or whatever you want to use, you're doing an amazing job. Now, at the same time, you know, one of the things that I noticed was happening when I got to the magnet high school, we looked really good on paper. I mean, you know, doing fine on the state assessments. But when we really started looking, because we were hitting that standard, we were hitting the mastery. Everybody was passing. You know, we were like 93, 94, 95, 99%, whatever. But when I took the data and I started looking at growth, you know, I remember saying this to my professional learning community, my instructional team. I said, guys, we're dumbing these kids down. And they're like, what are you talking about? We're doing fine. What was happening was our students who were coming in below grade level, we were doing a phenomenal job to get them to grade level in a pretty short amount of time, 1 to 2 years. Our students who are coming in at the 99th percentile, guess what we were doing? We're pulling them down to average pretty effectively in 1 to 2 years. So by the time everybody left, they were average. So that's why it's so important. We oftentimes think of data as determining who needs remediation. That's why it's really critical that we think about those students who are on level or above level, that we maintain that and we continue to grow them. So, you know, we talk all the time about RTI, response to intervention, and you have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Don't forget to put that extra tier up at the top for your students who are doing great, that you need to keep up there and keep them moving forward. Because we are masters as educators of pulling everybody to average. And we've got to be really cautious about that. Yeah, go ahead. Hang on, we can't hear you. Let me unmute you.
Okay, how do you reconcile kids that are very at a high level, the fact that they have little room to grow? How do we reconcile that to where it doesn't affect or hurt teachers simply because they have less room than other kids would have?
It's going to depend. So, for example, let's talk about it from the perspective of, let's say they're tying your evaluation or your pay to growth measures. Once a child reaches a certain standard, so let's assume we're talking about a norm reference test where you're going to have percentiles. You know, average is 50th percentile up to the 99th percentile to, you know, down the other direction. It's that perfect, almost bell curve. If you're talking about norm reference, it's staying at or meeting the standard. So let's say, and usually there's going to be a standard error of measure in there. So let's say you come in and you're at the 97th percentile and you drop to the 95th percentile. That's still considered excellent. And, you know, if I'm going to assign a point value to it, you still get all the points for that because you maintained. What unfortunately happens, though, a lot of times is, quite honestly, that we see that go just the opposite. They come in at the 99th percentile, then the next year they're at the 89th percentile, then the next year they're at the 79th percentile. But it's that whole idea of if you're in this range between, and usually it's going to be 92, 95 to 99th percentile, as long as you stay in that range, then you're considered to be in the right area for growth index, which means that you grew a year. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, in Dallas, we did pay for performance, and everybody thinks it's wonderful. It's probably going to be on the model for the state of Texas, you know. So that was a big argument because I've often said, and I absolutely believe this, put me in a school with low achievement, and I can push it up. It's really hard when you walk in a school and everybody's at the 95th or better percentile to keep it there. I'm telling you, that's as challenging as moving kids up. So there has to be a standard that as long as you maintain that or better, you know, or a percentage or whatever, you're going to be fine. Okay. Other questions? Okay. Questions about life in general? Questions about assignments? Anything like that? Okay. All right, well, guys, this is our last official meeting together. Just want to tell you, I absolutely love. Sorry, people are responding to me. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Melissa.
On some of the things on the student enrollment, I got numbers, but I couldn't get them separate for male and female. Is that all right if I just tell them
Yeah.
in general?
Yeah, absolutely. You can just put the whole number. That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, and honestly, too, I would be, if I were, let's say I'm pulling data from my school, and the only data I'm getting is not broken down by, whatever indicator you want to look at, gender, race, ethnicity, special programs, I would really question that, because if we're really going to meet every single child where they are, we got to know where they are. Does that make sense? So, it's always bothered me when schools and districts report just such generic data. It's really hard to identify who's doing well and who's not doing well, because every kid's going to need something different. If I'm a second language learner, I need a different, and I'm not doing well, I need a different treatment than the native speaker does, kind of thing. So, I would just, if that's the way they're reporting it, I guess I'd start asking some questions about, can we get it this way? Can we get this? Just because if you're really going to do the deep dig analysis of data that has to be done to really advance students forward, you need more information. Okay. Anything else, guys? Well, we are right at time, so just to, thank you guys. You've been an awesome class. Have loved working with you, and it was really gratifying to see some of you are kind of like, this is kind of fun, I like data, which I think was a pretty huge paradigm shift for some people. So I hope to have you guys in future classes, but if I don't, you're always welcome to call upon me. I do have a few connections with other places, so I know I've helped some people get some interviews in Dallas particularly, but also in the DFW Metroplex. But like I said, I'm constantly amazed and so just, what's the word I'm looking for? Hopeful for the future. We need some new blood, some new ideas in the leadership roles in our schools. So I feel like we're in great hands based on at least the students from LSUS. So thank y'all for letting me be a part of your lives, and have a great rest of the couple weeks, and good luck for those of you that are opening school in the next few days. I understand what that's like. Real quick, somebody asked, when will our first case study be scored? I thought I did them all. Yeah, if you didn't get a grade for some reason, just email me. I thought I just went through them right again before the Zoom meeting, and I didn't see anything I'd missed, but who knows? So just send me an email, okay, and I'll double check it. Okay. All right, guys, thank y'all. It's been a good 7 weeks. We'll see you soon.